Richard Boyd Barrett, to you first. What did you hope to achieve with the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador?
We think that it is now long past time that Israel is treated in the same way as apartheid South Africa was treated, that its entire regime and treatment of the Palestinians is tantamount to apartheid, to orchestrated, institutionalized racism, particularly with laws like the Israeli law of return, with the basic law of the Israeli state, with its checkpoints, its apartheid wall, its discrimination at every level, and then, of course, the ongoing campaign of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. And illegal settlements, and then the war crimes that it's committed on at least 4 occasions now in Gaza, claiming the lives of thousands of people in Gaza.
All right, okay. David Quinn, how about that? It's akin to apartheid South Africa, institutional racism, and we need to treat it the same.
I think it's a further attempt to demonise the state of Israel, to use terms like apartheid and attach it to that, the one democratic country in the Middle East. I mean, quite unlike South Africa, Arab Israelis are, have full voting rights. They're able to sit in the Israeli parliament. They're able to get on buses and go into restaurants just like everybody else. It's not the tiniest bit like apartheid South Africa in that respect. And to compare it with apartheid South Africa is simply a smear. And as I say, part of this attempt to demonise and isolate the one Jewish state in the world. I mean, we have many Muslim states in the world. Nobody has a problem with that. We have one Jewish state in the world, and that's because, of course, of the legacy of history and why the Israeli state and the Jewish state had to be created in 1948. All this seems to have been forgotten. We have an extremely unbalanced debate in an ongoing way in this country about the Israelis. There's no concentration on Hamas next door in Gaza. Hamas is listed as a terrorist organisation by the EU. Everybody considers the EU to be sensible, yet that is how it designates Hamas. It's not just the Israelis have a blockade on Gaza Strip, so does Egypt. Now, why would Egypt do that? It's because of Hamas. Hamas is an organisation in its basic ideological outlook is very like ISIS. It is dedicated to the quote-unquote, from its charter, obliteration of the state of Israel. It has a very Islamist, jihadist ideology. It wants to establish a caliphate in Palestine, which means the whole of the area, including what's now Israel. It doesn't favour a two-state solution, which is very much what I support.
Okay, how about that, Richard Boyd Barrett? You're demonising the Israeli state and you're ignoring the jihadist ideology of Hamas.
Yeah, well, first of all, on the apartheid state, B'Tselem, which is the main Israeli human rights organization, has described its own state, Israel, as an apartheid state. The main human rights organization in the United States, Human Rights Watch, has recently produced a report describing Israel as an apartheid state. And any objective look at the way Israel treats the Palestinians makes it clear that this is a racist state.
Do you have a blind spot about Hamas?
No, first of all, I was going to make that point. I lived in Israel, or Palestine, as I prefer to call it now, in 1987, when the first Palestinian Intifada exploded. And at that stage, Hamas did not even exist. The PLO weren't even in the country. They were exiled in Tunis. It was a spontaneous uprising of young Palestinian people who were living in refugee camps, most of them living in camps where their families had been expelled in an ethnic cleansing in 1948, where they had no future. They suffered institutionalized discrimination, and that is the nature of the Israeli state. And by the way, legally speaking, people have the right to resist an occupation of their territory. Israel has been engaged in a
I want to bring David Quinn back in. Yeah, you've had plenty of time. I want to bring David Quinn back in. David Quinn, what say you to that?
Well, I mean, Richard doesn't believe in a two-state solution. He believes in a one-state solution, which basically means the end of the state of Israel, which means we have no more Jewish state in the world, which to me is a kind of incredible thing after 1948, that the world would become intolerant of a solitary Jewish state, whereas, again, there are many Muslim states in the world, so we can tolerate the one Jewish state, which to my mind just goes so far in such an extreme position, and it's a position held by almost no one. I mean, Ireland actually, in respect of its attitude towards Israel. It's so one-sided. It's an almost total outlier within the European Union. I mean, as we were calling in this country for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador, other countries were calling in the Israeli ambassadors to express sympathy because of the 4,300 rockets, Iranian supplied, by the way, for the most part, that Hamas was raining down on that country. And like we had the Iranian foreign minister over here last week. He had a very friendly meeting with Simon Coveney. There was no indication of any tension. There was no indication that Simon Coveney was lecturing the Iranian ambassador about the fact that they supply rockets to another terrorist organisation in Lebanon, Hezbollah, as well as to Hamas.
Okay.
So Israel is surrounded by entities that are absolutely intent on its destruction. And I mean, what Richard ultimately wants is also the destruction of the state of Israel.
I'll give you a very brief final word on that, Richard. Do you want the end of the state of Israel?
I want an end of the apartheid state of Israel. In other words, I believe that Jew, Arab, Christian and people of no religion should have equal rights in the land that is Palestine, or call it Israel. It doesn't really matter as long as they have equal rights.
You don't want to call it Israel, though?
Well, I think it is up to the people of the area, the people of a legitimate claim to live there. And that includes, by the way, 6 million Palestinian refugees living in rotten refugee camps for decades in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan. All of those people have the right to determine the future of that land.
All right.
And when there is equality, it'll be up to the people there.
David Quinn, a very quick last word to you. Very brief. David Quinn, very quick last word to you.
Richard does not want a single Jewish state to exist in the world. That's in practice what that means. That's what he's saying.